Welcome to HR Masters, a podcast where we sit down and talk about key learnings and best practices with the masters of human resources. Find us through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other platforms. Now sit back, turn it up, and get ready to get your masters in HR with our host, Jordi Romero.
Welcome to today's HR Masters episode. Today we have Peter Van Kersen. Did I say that right, Peter?
Yeah, almost perfect.
Okay, welcome, Peter. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
So I was going to introduce yourself, but I think you're going to do a better job than I do. So tell us a little bit who you are.
Okay, I'll give that a go. So I was born in the Netherlands. I didn't want to have a career in HR. In fact, it was never even on my mind. I wanted to be Indiana Jones when I was a kid. I couldn't imagine anything more exciting than traveling the world, looking for treasure and fighting bad guys. I didn't end up being Indiana Jones. I started with a career in recruitment, and I did that for a few years, and I then realized that I found it immensely exciting to see other people succeed in whatever they were doing. And from there, I moved into the startup environment, also in a role of recruiter, and that's where I think that's where I rediscovered my inner Indiana Jones. And when I realized that working in HR for a startup company is pretty much all the adventure that I can handle. So from there, I've worked for a few immensely successful startups, including Katawiki in the Netherlands, Foodora and Delivery Hero in Berlin, and then Glovo in Barcelona, all in the food delivery sphere, except Katawiki, which do online auctions for collectibles. And now I have decided to go back to the very beginnings of what it means to start a company. And I've joined an even smaller startup. We are currently 5 people here in Barcelona. And we are on a mission to create a robot cook that can prepare any meal anywhere in the world.
That's something Indiana Jones will be proud of, I'm sure. So thanks for joining the podcast, Peter. You mentioned something, like you said you didn't want to be, you didn't plan to be in HR, but you kind of became a recruiter. How did that happen? Like, what was the first time you got a job offer in recruitment, or decided to apply for a company as recruiter?
Yeah, it's a good question. I used to play American football in the Netherlands. Back even further, I used to work as a cook. For about 10 years during most of my studies. But my American football coach one day asked me if I wanted to come work for his firm in the capacity of a summer intern or something like this, just getting back in touch with candidates that we had lost touch with. After doing that for a month, he asked me to stay on board full time. So I did that next to my studies. Yeah, and I've had several jobs as a recruiter since then.
Okay, interesting. I didn't see that one coming. So you mentioned, 3 pretty big companies in terms of how many people work there. Katawiki, Foodora, who eventually merged into Delivery Hero, and Glovo. What was the biggest company of these 3? When you were there, how many people were working there?
So that's by far Delivery Hero. I think they have up to 10,000 employees worldwide now. But
10,000 people.
But they grow, they grow extremely fast. And the company that I worked for, Foodora, was fairly autonomous during the entire time I was with the group, and they had up to 2,200 employees.
Foodora alone was 2,000 people.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. And you were there a VP of People Operations, right? Which is kind of a job title you dragged along on your next few adventures. No, you started as a recruiter, and then you eventually became like this People Operations expert. What does a People Operations person do? What does this actually mean?
Yeah, it's a good question again. I think it's a title that was made popular by Laszlo Bock, the VP of People Operations at Google. And I think he only took the title because it had operations in it, which made the developers respect him more. allegedly. But it's basically taking care of the entire employee life cycle, from talent attraction to everything that's related to HR operations or admin, payroll, etc., to learning and development and people analytics. So those are the things that I was taking care of back in Foodora.
But that's almost everything in HR, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just a fancy title for.
Okay, so it's the same as HR. So VP of People Operations is exactly the same as VP of HR or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you moved on to VP of People. Then you dropped the operations. So what was Global when you joined and when you left? How many people were there already?
So Global back then had just launched in South America. So we were still fairly small there. I think we were between 150 and 200 employees worldwide.
That's small for you, I see.
Yeah, although Katowice was about 30 people when I joined, and Foodora also around 100. So it's a fairly common stage for me to enter the company in. But when I left, Global must have been around 900 employees.
And that's, again, without counting all the riders, all the people who actually do the delivery of the food.
Yeah.
And now you went from like 10,000, 2,900 people to a company of 4 or 5 people. How's that changed? Like, don't you feel alone in the office?
It's been very lonely. Although it's also been the first time in years that I can just enter the office and focus on things for a longer period of time, and not be distracted by whatever is going on. So that's been an interesting experience.
So that's we had Alexa in our previous version of in the previous episode of the podcast, and we were asking her when do startups or companies in general bring in their first HR people, and we talked about this range all the way from 25 people to 40, 50 people. That's what typically makes a company realize they need somebody in HR. How does a company of like 3-4 people decide to bring in a chief of people, talent, and culture? How did that happen? Why did the company decide that it was worth bringing you in so early?
Yeah, I don't think they were planning on it. It's a bit of a weird story, but I met this guy in a bar.
All the good stories start like that.
He was rushing to make things worse, but. We kind of started talking. I immediately fell in love with the project and kind of made him realize that it would be a huge investment to get someone in HR in as their first employee. But I think it's already paying off because I have a huge background in recruitment, and things are extremely hands-on at the moment. We're hiring lots and lots of people, so we plan to be about 50 employees by the end of the year. Okay. But obviously, I like to think that I bring the added benefit of having done this before, and like to think that we can scale sustainably now.
Okay, that's interesting. It's definitely not the usual path. So now that the audience knows you a little bit more, Peter, you and I spoke before, and one of the topics that clearly brought your passion up to the surface is everything that has to do with automation in HR, right? You very fast started, and obviously we run Factorial, so we think a little bit about automating things in HR. Tell us why you're so passionate about it. Like, what do you think is the problem in the world right now that needs HR automation?
Yeah, so I think the whole world, especially in companies, has already caught up with the immense workload that's sort of created around us, except in HR. A lot of, and to a certain extent, this is due to some bureaucratic processes in countries. But there's simply the tools are available now to gather and process data much faster than they were 20 or 30 years ago. But most countries haven't caught up, and most HR departments haven't caught up. So when I joined Foodora, keeping in mind my recruitment background, I was first exposed to my teammates on the HR side of things, having to file piles and piles of paperwork for every employee. We were hiring 60 employees per month. So I just saw them drown in paperwork and get burned out. I go absolutely crazy. So this is when I started to look into the issue, and I found that there were some small startups and some HR information systems that were trying to tackle the problem, but they weren't really either accessible. In other words, we couldn't implement an HRIS like this in a week rather than a few months. Or we just didn't know about them, or we didn't have the money for them. And that's when we started hacking together through Google Forms and whatnot, just the processes to lift the burden from these guys. And that's where I wouldn't say I got passionate with the topic, but I found it very interesting, and I tried to make it a thing throughout my career.
So it's a very clear sign when people are so frustrated that they start hacking together like external systems that they're not meant to do that, just to fix some problems. So what would you say? I mean, you mentioned bureaucracy and administration. No? We know Europe in general tends to be a big fan of doing a lot of paperwork for the simplest thing. But unless you can change the law or you can change the government, which is something that at least takes time, if that's even possible, how can you fix anything with Google Forms and a little bit of automation?
Yeah, it's not necessarily about fixing government processes, but at least you can make sure that things are optimized on your end. And I'll give an example. So back in Germany, we were losing vast amount of time printing papers, handing them to employees on their first day. They would then have to fill them out. We would scan them, but also put the information in a digital system from the handwritten forms. So this is the first thing that we changed. All the forms that we submitted had to have a certain logo on it. It had to be in a certain format. So what we did is simply recreate that form in a Google Doc and had it automatically filled using a Google Sheet or a Google Form. And that saved us so much time that we could spend that time actually showing the new employees around and making sure that they had a wonderful onboarding rather than filling out and signing forms all day. And I think we'll get to a point where government agencies realize that this is just inefficient, and my hope is that they'll immediately jump to a blockchain solution that will make things a lot easier and more efficient. But I don't know.
So I had a question. I had a question around that. But since you're already with the blockchain, so tell us, how do you think blockchain can help HR?
So I think in my ideal scenario, we all carry our identity on an app on our phones or whatever device we'll use then. That's all blockchain certified, and we'll use that to pay or to take a loan, but also to let your company know who you are and sign documents. And since there's almost no way to falsify that, we could easily use that for identification in Social Security or taxation systems, etc.
So but then your dream is bigger than HR. You're assuming that the whole society is going to be driven by this shared blockchain that's actually going to be recognized by the government, right? Because you mentioned Social Security and tax agency, and I mean, so far I don't think central governments are a big base of decentralized networks where they actually play a role. But do you think that's something that's happening in the next 3 to 5 years, or that's something that maybe, if ever, in the future?
Yeah, no, I don't really see that happening in such a short time frame. But what I do see happening is blockchain being used, and I know of a few companies that are doing this to support the gig economy, and that more jobs will be gigged out, so to say. That you just offer your services on a blockchain solution. Although, yeah, I think we're still far away.
So at least in the intra-company, not with the government maybe, but intra-company, like leverage the blockchain. Is there any other new technology or newly available, from a mass market perspective, like AI, ML, big data, that you think could play a role or will play a role in HR?
Yeah, I think especially in talent attraction, We will come a long way with AI. I think the state of AI at the moment is already quite useful in terms of parsing and scanning CVs, in terms of facial and micro expression recognition in video interviews, for example. So I think with solutions like this, we'll make it easier to not only match candidates to jobs based on qualifications, but also find out things about them that we didn't even know we were looking for. And get to know what people are really like.
So efficient stalking for HR. Is this something that really happens? Like social networks, I remember back in the day when social networks were a new thing, there was a lot of issues with HR kind of getting in social media, no? To know, what these people really were other than their CV. Do you think that still has a big impact, or everybody's kind of normalized their online presence to the offline?
I think quite the opposite has happened. I think with platforms like LinkedIn, it's much easier to project yourself or to portray yourself as something different than you actually are. And as a very interesting sort of sidetrack from that, I'm now beta testing a tool called Bunch AI that scans a LinkedIn profile and give you a sort of a personality assessment based on what they've written about themselves, which is quite interesting because it would theoretically be the personality assessment of the person that they've tried to be rather than the person that they actually are.
That's true. Okay, and interesting. So all of these things you said, like this, I mean, some sounded closer than the others in the future, in the timeline, because you mentioned some sort of like intelligent job recommendation or like CV profiler, and then you mentioned others such as facial recognition in video interviews. Are these things you're using already, or that you've used, or things that you think will happen, or things that are happening already?
Yeah, I know that there are a few companies in video interviewing that claim they have significant results, and we've tested it at Foodora.
Okay.
Yeah, it didn't turn out to be the right solution for us because the model just needs so much data to train on, and it would need constant feedback. Imagine claiming to recognize when someone is lying about their past experience. That's a pretty serious statement to make.
It's a bit scary as well, but will definitely happen. There's another area that we sometimes look into, which is there is the bureaucracy of bringing in a new employee, or when an employee leaves a company and so on. But there's this other trail of data that people started calling people analytics or people data a while ago. Is this something you've seen or you've leveraged in these much bigger organizations, and then especially super fast growing organizations that you've been at?
Yeah, a little bit.
How does one use people analytics for real world useful case?
Yeah, it's I think people would call or could call your yearly engagement survey already people analytics, right? It's a heartbeat of how happy people are in the organization, and if you know that, you could potentially correlate it with a bunch of other information. For example, when people churn, look for a new job, or when they report in sick, when they start asking for promotions, or you could kind of overlap it with the promotion cycles or the salary review cycles. And it's very interesting to see what happens after a salary review cycle, and it's usually engagement dropping rather than increasing. So
who is doing that? I mean, these are cool ideas, but does HR have a data scientist now doing all of these crazy reports?
Yeah, I think they should.
They should. Okay.
Where we've gone furthest with these ideas was in Foodora, where we had reasonably accurate engagement data, where we would run a survey every month.
Okay, so it was self-reported. So people said, like, I'm happy at work, or I'm working too much, or whatever they said.
Yeah, and okay. This was a so-called NPS or an eNPS score, but it also asked around 22 questions, around 14 so-called drivers from recognition to autonomy to the tools at work, etc.
Okay. You can, if there's any technique or methodology that we mentioned during the podcast, you can send us later the links and then we'll publish them in the notes. Okay, interesting. So you mentioned obviously this is a 10,000 employee company with a 2,000 employee division or group, which is Foodora inside of a much bigger company. What about SMEs? Does an SME have people data or people analytics? A company with 25 employees or 100 employees, does it have any data that's worth looking into?
They do. Well, I assume that they wouldn't have an engagement survey as big and as thorough as those larger companies do. But then there's also the question how valid they really are. I imagine in those smaller companies there's a lot more rich data. In other words, people just talking to each other and HR being in touch with pretty much the whole company, knowing what's going on. So the problem with that obviously is that it isn't digital, and it isn't quantifiable.
Yeah, it isn't the same type of data, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned. Well, sorry, just I don't want to interrupt you there because you mentioned. I imagine these people don't typically do this, high quality surveys to their employees. But should they? Should they be doing those interviews? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so, but I also think that the trend in HR at the moment is to think that employee engagement surveys are the be all end all, but I'm a bit skeptical about them. So what I think they should do is make it easy, to make it easier for people to give reliable information. I think we should gather a lot more information rather than asking people how happy they are at work, because it doesn't really mean anything. Some personality types are just happier than others, and then if you want high engagement scores, you should just hire happy people. So what I am a proponent of is sort of keeping a finger on the pulse continuously, and then you could ask for much more interesting things than how happy are you at work. You could also ask for continuous feedback about the people that you work with, or what is bothering you at work. So, and I think big and small companies can do that just as well. Okay,
and big companies do that, and small don't.
I think big companies generally think that the implementation of a single tool is going to solve all their problems, or is going to give them relevant information, and small companies either neglect it or HR is too busy doing other things. But I think the tools are out there and scale no matter how big the company is.
Okay, interesting. So we're talking a lot about employee feedback right now. No, mostly the examples we both gave were around satisfaction and engagement and so on. But there is another dimension of following an employee through the lifetime of a company with data, which is their performance. Do you think this is something that is properly being automated? Do you think that's something that's done well? Like, have you ever seen good performance management implemented in one of the companies you worked with?
No, not really.
Okay, that's sad. I was hoping for a yes.
No, so I think it depends a bit on what we would define as a good performance management system, and I think we'll get close by saying that it's something that is objective, or as close to objective as possible, is actually aimed at improving the employee and the eventual output, serves the company, is easy to conduct, and is generally liked or not despised by the employee. And I don't think there's anything that comes close. And I think I think the reasons go a lot deeper than we probably realize.
Okay.
I think it's basic human psychology that some people in a performance review will receive better reviews than others, and then there's a sense of jealousy, there's a sense of being left behind. I think measuring people against each other is wrong in principle, so it's very difficult to get just right, and that's why I've been through a few iterations of different systems, and we never seem to get it just right, but obviously.
What's the closest you've seen? I mean, you mentioned one of these frictions is a deep psychological challenge. I don't think that's easy to fix. What's the best you've seen, or something that you would recommend, or probably apply at your new company?
Yeah, So I'm a big fan of continuous feedback, and that is not so much relying on the tool that you use, but more on your leaders and the way they form relationships with their employees. I think it's extremely important to create or to nourish a relationship of openness and honesty that will allow you to give positive and negative feedback whenever you want, and kind of summarize that in a monthly or in a monthly session, and then in a quarterly official feedback moment. And then it's good to cover both the output, what is expected of you or your actual performance, but also to focus on the development of the employee and completely separate those two things. So where we've tried doing that and where we think we were relatively successful was in Foodora, where feedback was given in a very open format. So along two questions: what does this employee do well, and what could they do better? And those sort of review cycles or those feedback cycles were completely detached from the actual performance cycles. Yeah, and that is a model that we then copied again in Glovo.
And this is like a 360 at the end of the day, or who does feedback for who?
Yeah, it is a 360. The manager reviews the employee reviews manager, and the employee is reviewed by a number of peers in and around the team. And I think the question is then often, who do you ask to perform these?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's every month, right? So as short as the question is, you want people to stop for like 10 minutes and think about this other employee.
Yeah. So in Glovo, we actually didn't do it every month. We did it once every 6 months because it is a lot of work.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah, and especially because it is qualitative, it takes quite a bit of time to review everyone. So I would actually suggest, I'll start implementing a performance review system here again soon, is to do it regularly, but boil it down to adjectives rather than entire text about what someone is like and how they've performed. Yeah, just to get more data that isn't necessarily as rich, but is much more useful.
And then you'll run these adjectives through some machine learning and AI and eventually get some conclusions, right?
I hope so. Yeah, we can do some heat mapping of what someone is like and how they are perceived by the team.
Okay, interesting. That was very interesting. I mean, I think we covered a lot of different topics that can be useful for some other HR professionals that are following our podcast. One thing that you touched on briefly, but I'm very curious. There is HR. I mean, one of our key values for Factorial and one of our drivers is to bring some of the good practices that large enterprises have developed around HR and technology and processes and so on and techniques into the SME, right? So democratize HR basically for small and medium companies. What do you think big companies do better than small companies? I mean, other than everything in terms of HR, right? So what do you think, if you think they do anything better than small companies?
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of standardized testing or of assessments, and it is because I think they're very difficult to cheat, and they tell a lot about the basic building blocks of what someone is like. So I believe a lot in getting to know people on a very personal level, to know what drives them, what's really important for them, and how we essentially what environment we need to create to make them a hero in their own story here at work. And for that, it's important to just be completely honest with each other. And I think personality assessments are a very good way to approximate the truth.
It sounds like a contradiction, no? To know someone very deeply, you want to do a standardized personality test. I mean, makes sense. I understand what you're saying, but it sounds like a big challenge. Does it, like you saw it work?
Come again?
You saw it working. You saw this combination of standardized personality testing, batteries, and so on for really knowing candidates before you went through with them.
Yeah. So we've applied it in different stages of the interview process. Sometimes someone's experience and knowledge is just too valuable to let go of a candidate. But then it's more of a sanity check towards the end. And we've often used it completely towards the end of the process, or even after an offer, for the manager to get to know what their employee is like, what motivates them, and how they should talk to them, and who they should group them with. So I think it's very valuable there.
Welcome, John, the new psychopath of your team. I hope it sounds challenging, but no, I've seen them work a couple of times, and it's interesting how accurate they tend to be. We run them with very junior salespeople who have so little experience that it's, you sit across the table from them in an interview and you don't know what to ask. It's like, what did you do? Well, I went to school, and what do you like to do? And they kind of say like the obvious things that they think you want to hear, which is not what you want to hear. And the personality test was actually more interesting. Okay, and is there anything that you think small companies are better than large companies in terms of HR?
I think so. Most of them hire someone that is very extroverted, very personable, like a typical HR mom, who ends up doing everything really, really well. And so that person is often admired throughout the company, and new employees can feel that because they get all the personal attention that they need, that every employee should need. I think in larger companies, it becomes much more institutionalized, and then every onboarding is the same. Every package that new employees receive on their desk, no matter how well meant, is the same, and it's all part of a process. I think the lack of processes in smaller companies makes it feel more authentic than being thrown or being dragged rather through an onboarding process or an interview process in a large company.
Yeah, of course there is the downside of having an employee show up and there is no laptop, no chair, no desk for this employee, which I'm sure you've seen. I've definitely seen this happen many, many times, unfortunately. Sometimes we're not ready for the growth that's coming. Okay, so I have the last question for you. Are you ready? So the question is, imagine you were, younger you, and you realized you were not going to be Indiana Jones. You would actually end up working in HR. What do you wish younger you knew before you got in HR?
That's a good question. About the HR sort of environment, or about life in general?
Surprise us.
I think the biggest, the best piece of advice to give anyone is to be completely honest at all times with the people that you work with, but also with yourself. I see now in HR, people are desperate to get into some company just because they have a cool brand name or because they imagine themselves in that company or in that role. And often they haven't been honest with themselves. They haven't figured out who they really are, and they end up being miserable. Another thing that I've learned is that you should find an environment where you thrive working really, really hard and struggling for it. Find ways or reasons to struggle every day, because I think success.
That translates to passion, probably, right? Like what you're defining sounds to me a little bit like passion.
Yeah, but I'm also a bit skeptical about people that claim they have a passion and that that's something that they live for. I don't think there's many people that live for the company other than maybe the founder. But even if you're not the founder and you decide that you're going to work really, really hard for something and you're going to surround yourself with challenges that you don't really have the answer to, every time you fix one of those or you meet one of those challenges and you fix the problem, you're going to feel good about yourself, and that way you optimize for success, which will in turn make you feel happy.
Okay. We'll take that piece of wisdom for younger Peters that are listening to the podcast. We'll leave it there, Peter. It's been super interesting. There's a lot of things to change in HR, small companies and large companies alike. We'll hope that some people enjoy your experiences, your opinions, and the good practices that you recommended today. It was a pleasure having you today. Thank you very much. By the way, I'm very jealous of the views you have, wherever you're working on. Although we're in the same city, your views are much nicer than ours. Thank you so much, Peter. Have a good day.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have a good day.
So that was our podcast today. See you next week.
If you like this, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to tune in next week to HR Masters.